1 year after my divorce, my former father-in-law saw me alone at a fertility clinic and smirked. My daughter was right to leave you. Now she has a son with your ex-best friend. But when I asked one quiet question, the woman who walked through the door made his face go pale. The first thing I noticed was his coat, charcoal wool, the kind that costs more than most people's car payments. A single gold cufflink at the wrist. He moved through the automatic doors of Lakeshore Fertility Partners the way Gerald Voss had moved through every room in his life, like the air inside had been arranged specifically for his arrival. I had been sitting in that waiting area for 26 minutes, a Navy legal folder balanced across my knees when he walked in. I did not flinch. I did not look away. I simply sat still and watched him stop walking the moment he saw me, and watched the smile spread slowly across his face. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind Gerald wore when he had spotted a wound he hadn't made yet. Let me tell you something about Gerald Voss before I tell you what happened next. He was, by every metric that mattered to his social circle, an extraordinary man. He sat on 2 hospital foundation boards in Madison. He remembered every name at every function. He sent handwritten thank you notes on embossed stationery and always smelled like cedar and bourbon, and knew exactly which compliment to give which person to make them feel both flattered and slightly indebted to him. He also, in 7 years of Sunday dinners and carefully observed holidays, never once called me anything other than Daniel, son, in a tone that made clear the son was doing a lot of work to cover something he had decided not to say out loud. I had married his daughter Claire 7 years before the morning of that waiting room. We met in graduate school. She was in her 2nd year. I was finishing my 1st, and she had the kind of easy confidence that reads as intelligence until you have known someone long enough to measure the gap. She was beautiful in an uncomplicated way. She made people laugh at dinner parties. She was good at seeming like everything was fine. I was good at making sure it actually was. We were married in June, in the kind of wedding Gerald had been planning for a daughter since approximately 1989. He wanted a particular venue. I chose a different one. He never mentioned it again, and he never forgot it. 2 years after the wedding, we started trying. That is the only word for it, the one that people use, and I never thought about how blunt it was until it started taking longer than either of us expected, and the trying started to feel like exactly the right word, a verb that implied failure waiting on the other side of every attempt. My doctor referred us to Dr. Felicia Okonkwo at Lakeshore Fertility Partners. Reproductive endocrinologist, 20 years in practice, the kind of quiet precision that makes you trust someone with something you would not give to anyone else. She walked us through everything: blood work, hormone panels, a semen analysis that came back with some complications on my end, and eventually a plan that involved retrieving embryos and freezing them for transfer. We retrieved 6 viable embryos over 2 cycles. 6. I remember sitting in Dr. Okonkwo's office afterward and counting the zeros in what we had spent, and then deciding it didn't matter, because we had 6 chances now, which was 6 more than we'd had 6 months before. The first transfer failed. The second transfer took. Claire was pregnant for 10 weeks. Her particular body, the one Gerald had never once cataloged for inadequacies, because Gerald never imagined his daughter could be the inadequate one, did not hold it. She was 33 years old, and she lay on a hospital bed, and she did not cry until the nurse left the room. The third transfer also took. She was 9 weeks along when I told her, with the particular careful flatness of someone delivering news they had rehearsed, that I thought we should talk about us and whether us was still working. She lost that pregnancy 3 days later. I want to be clinical about this because the clinical version is the only one I can still hold without it getting away from me. 2 pregnancies, 2 losses. In the space of 16 months. Claire came out the other side of the second one, and she told me that she could not do another cycle immediately, that she needed to be not a patient for a little while, that she needed a few months of being just a person before she became a clinical subject again. I said I understood. 3 weeks later, she told me she wanted a divorce. 4 weeks after that, she signed the paperwork. We had 4 embryos remaining in Lakeshore Fertility Partners cryogenic storage. The divorce settlement, drafted by Claire's attorney in language so clean, it had clearly been prepared in advance of the conversation in which she told me our marriage wasn't working, addressed the embryos in 3 sentences. They were to remain in storage, jointly held, requiring written mutual consent for any use, destruction, or transfer to a third party. It was standard language. I read it 3 times. I should have read it 30. Gerald stopped in front of my chair. He looked down at me the way he always had. Not quite contempt, not quite pity, something calibrated precisely between the two. "Well," he said, loud enough for the receptionist and at least 2 other people in the waiting area to hear. "I didn't think you'd still be coming to places like this." I closed the folder in my lap. "Good morning, Gerald." He liked people who crumbled. I had known this for 7 years. My steadiness irritated him the way a closed door irritates someone who expects all doors to open for them. "Claire was right to leave," he said. "She has a real family now, a beautiful son with Marcus. Some men were simply not meant for fatherhood." I will tell you what those words felt like. They felt like a hand reaching into my sternum, finding the place that had been held together with care and effort and 2.5 years of therapy with a man named Dr. Bennett Choi, who had a print of a heron above his desk and a gift for sitting in silence without filling it. They felt like fingers pressing on exactly that place. I breathed in, I breathed out, and I thought about the email. 16 months before that morning, I'd been sitting in my apartment on a Thursday in February, eating cereal at 11 p.m. because I had worked past dinner and forgotten. I opened my laptop to check something work-related and made the mistake of checking an email account I had mostly stopped using, the one that had been my primary address during the fertility treatments, the one attached to the patient portal at Lakeshore Fertility Partners. I had been meaning to update my contact information for months. The divorce had changed a dozen practical things, and I kept making a list of the changes to make and then leaving the list on my counter and going to bed. There was one new message in that inbox. It was an automated billing summary. Date, December 5th. Line item, embryo thaw procedure, single unit. Line item, transfer cycle preparation. Line item, embryo transfer, fresh protocol. Total, 4,460. Beneath it, in small blue text, for questions about this billing statement, please contact our patient services department. I put my cereal bowl down on the coffee table. I read the email again. I read it a third time. December 5th had been 17 days after Claire filed for divorce. We had been separated for 7 weeks at that point. The settlement had not yet been finalized. The consent clause that made both our signatures required for any embryo use had not yet been signed. But it also didn't need to be signed yet because the embryos were still jointly held under the original storage agreement, which required written consent from both parties, which I had never given. My hands were not shaking. I remember noticing that specifically, that my hands were very still, resting on either side of the laptop, while something cold and very quiet moved through my chest. I called the clinic the next morning at 8:11 a.m. I asked to speak with patient services. I was told there had been a procedure associated with my account in December. I asked if I could confirm the consent documentation on file. There was a pause. I was transferred. I was on hold for 13 minutes. Then a man named Trevon, who sounded like he had just realized he was having a very bad morning, told me that the documentation appeared complete and that the consent form showed my signature. I told Trevon that I had not signed any consent form in December. There was another pause. Trevon said he would have to escalate this and would call me back. He called me back 5 hours later. He said the clinic would need to review the file. He used the phrase internal protocol twice. He did not sound reassured. I hung up and called my attorney. Her name was Diane Castellano. She had been practicing family law in Madison for 13 years, had handled 4 reproductive rights cases involving contested embryo use, and had the particular quality of being able to make her voice go completely level when the information she was receiving was anything but. She listened to me describe the billing email. She asked me 3 clarifying questions. Then she said, "Don't contact the clinic again without me. Don't call Claire. Don't call anyone. Come in tomorrow morning." I went in the next morning. Diane's office was on the 4th floor of a building on Monroe Street that smelled faintly of old carpet and someone's lunch. She had case files in neat stacks on every surface, and a single dying fern on the windowsill that I always assumed was a metaphor for something. She listened to me without interrupting. When I finished, she picked up a legal pad and wrote 3 things on it, which she did not show me. Then she said, "If what you're describing is accurate, this is not a civil matter with a divorce addendum. This is a criminal matter with a civil addendum. Do you understand the difference?" I said I did. She said, "Then I need you to understand one more thing. The way to win this is not to go fast. The way to win this is to be more thorough than they believed anyone would bother to be." I said I understood that too. I went home. I did not call Claire. I did not call Marcus. I opened the billing email again and I read every line item. Thaw procedure, transfer cycle preparation, embryo transfer, fresh protocol. And I let myself feel for exactly 1 hour everything I needed to feel. The grief, the violation, the specific particular fury of a man who has been through 2 losses and a divorce and is now sitting in his apartment at 11 p.m., learning that someone used what remained of his family making to build someone else's. Then I closed my laptop. Then I went to work. What followed was not quick. I want to be honest about that because the stories that get told about these things tend to compress the timeline in a way that makes the waiting invisible. And the waiting was the worst part. 16 months of being methodical when every instinct in my body wanted to scream. There was a period of roughly 3 months where I knew something had happened and had no proof beyond an automated billing statement and a phone call with a clinic administrator named Trevon, who had gone very careful and very quiet when I mentioned the word signature. During those 3 months, I went to work every day as a compliance auditor at a mid-size insurance firm, which was, it turned out, useful training for the documentation war I was now in the middle of. And I saw Dr. Bennett Choi every Tuesday, and I did not tell anyone what I was looking for because Diane had told me not to, and Diane was right. Diane subpoenaed the clinic's records under the patient privacy provisions that still made me a party to those embryos under the original storage agreement. It took 7 weeks and a formal petition to a judge named the Honorable Patricia Alibi, who had handled 11 reproductive law cases in her 10-year tenure on the Wisconsin Circuit Court bench, and who read the petition in her chambers with the careful attention of someone who understood exactly what she was looking at. Judge Alibi granted the subpoena. The records came back. The consent form on file showed my signature, Daniel R. Marsh, signed in blue ink, dated December 2nd, 3 days before the procedure. My legal name, the name on every document I had ever signed at that clinic, was Daniel Robert Marshvoss. I had hyphenated when I married Claire. Every intake form, every consent for every procedure, every insurance authorization for 7 years of treatment carried my full hyphenated name. The forger had not known that. They had used the name on Claire's copy of the divorce filing, Daniel R. Marsh, which stripped the Voss and gave me back only the name I had before I became part of a family that was now doing this to me. One detail. One small, procedural, devastating detail. Diane brought in a forensic document examiner named Walter Hines, who had testified in 52 cases across the Midwest over a 25-year career, and who submitted a 16-page report concluding that the signature on the consent form was inconsistent with the exemplar signatures provided and consistent with a traced or copied reproduction attempt. He attached 13 comparative photographs, the spacing of the letters, the pressure variation, the way my lowercase r curves, something I had apparently never consciously known about the way I write my own name. Walter Hines knew. Now Diane had it in writing. I remember driving home the evening Diane called to tell me Walter Hines's report was complete. I pulled into my parking space and sat in my car in the dark for a long time. 13 comparative photographs of my own handwriting. A forensic stranger who had spent 3 days studying my lowercase r and knew something about how I held a pen that I didn't know about myself. I had been copied. The most fundamental version of my consent had been traced and reproduced and handed to a clinic receptionist and filed in a folder with my name on it. I sat in my car for 20 minutes. Forensic stranger who had spent 3 days studying my lowercase r and knew something about how I held a pen that I didn't know about myself. I had been copied. The most fundamental version of my consent had been traced and reproduced and handed to a clinic receptionist and filed in a folder with my name on it. I sat in my car for 20 minutes. Then I went inside and made dinner and called my brother and did not tell him any of this because Diane had said not to, and because my brother's way of handling bad news was to want to drive over immediately and confront everyone, and I did not have the bandwidth. Then came the surveillance footage. Lakeshore Fertility Partners parking lot was covered by 2 exterior cameras installed after a vandalism incident in 2020. The footage from December 2nd, the day the forged consent form had been dated, showed a black Lexus RX parking in space 9 at 9:18 a.m. The driver did not exit. The passenger did. The passenger was Marcus. I want to tell you that I was surprised. I want to give you the version where I sat in Diane's office and looked at the paused frame on her laptop. Marcus in a gray coat, manila envelope under his arm, walking through the exact same automatic doors I had walked through dozens of times as a patient and felt my jaw drop. But the truth is that I had known, somewhere below language, from the moment I read that billing email. There were only a few people on Earth who knew about those embryos, and only one of them had been in my living room 13 years in a row, listening to me talk about what they meant. My best friend. 13 years. The man who had shown up at my door with a pot of chili the week after my first miscarriage, and sat with me for 4 hours without once asking me to feel better. Who had been in the hospital waiting room for both of my losses. Who knew because I had told him on my couch with a beer, and the unguarded honesty of a person who believes they are safe, that when I said I needed a break from treatment, I did not mean I was giving up. I meant I needed to breathe. He had chosen to hear it differently, or he had chosen Claire. I'm not sure those are different things. He walked into the clinic at 9:20 a.m. He walked back out at 9:47 a.m. He was carrying a manila envelope when he went in. He was not carrying it when he came out. The driver of the black Lexus was not charged with anything in that footage. He was simply a man in a parking space, waiting. But Diane ran the plate. Gerald Voss, registered owner since 2022. We sat with that footage for a long time. I thought about all the Sunday dinners, all the Daniel sons, all the years Gerald had looked at me across a table and calculated, with those bright, careful eyes, exactly where the weaknesses were. I thought about what it takes to stay in a parking space for 29 minutes while someone walks into a building to file a document that doesn't belong to them, the patience of it, the organization of it. He had not just driven Marcus, he had waited. Then Diane made a call. Her name was Renata Boyle. She was a senior investigator with the Wisconsin Department of Justice 20 years in, with a specialization in financial and document fraud. She had a face like a woman who had heard every variation of the sentence I didn't know that was illegal and had developed a productive indifference to it. She wore a dark navy coat and moved with the careful purpose of someone who treated every threshold as a place where something consequential might happen. When Diane first brought Renata in, she sat in Diane's office across from me for about 50 minutes and asked questions the way investigators do. Flat, methodical, circling back on details I thought I had already answered and asking them from a slightly different angle. She wasn't unkind. She was, like a good scalpel, precise. At the end of the meeting, she looked at me and said, "I want to be honest with you. This is going to require more patience than you want to give it. We need the complete picture, and the complete picture takes time." I told her I understood about patience. She said, "I know. Your attorney mentioned you work in compliance." I said yes. She said, "Good." Renata had been assigned to our case for 10 months by the time Gerald walked into that waiting room. She had been building something specific, something I had not told Gerald about, had not told Claire about, had not mentioned to anyone except Diane and the small team at the DOJ, who had been working quietly while Gerald posted photographs of a little boy named Caleb on his Facebook page, with captions about answered prayers, and the son-in-law replacement he always needed, and what it means when life finds its proper course. I had seen every post. I had not commented on a single one. I had saved screenshots of every one. Gerald was still talking. Something about Caleb's chubby cheeks. Something about how life has a way of correcting itself. Something about how he and Marcus had become quite close, practically father and son now, which was, he let his eyes land on me just for a moment. The natural way of these things. I let him finish. "Is that what you believe?" I asked. The automatic doors slid open, cold air on navy wool, an envelope sealed with the DOJ stamp. Renata Boyle stopped beside my chair, gave me a short nod, and then looked at Gerald Voss with the particular attention of a woman who has been waiting a long time to be in a room with someone. "Mr. Voss." She said it the way people say names when they already know everything. "I'm glad you're here." His hand went to his coat pocket. I watched his fingers close around something. Keys, maybe. Or just air. "I don't know what this is about," he said. She lifted the envelope. "It concerns Caleb Voss Reyes. Preliminary records indicate he was conceived using a frozen embryo genetically connected to Mr. Marsh Voss. The consent paperwork appears to have been falsified." The room went still in the particular way rooms go still when something that has been building for a long time finally arrives in a physical space, and everyone in it feels the pressure of it without yet understanding the shape. Gerald opened his mouth. A thin, uneven breath came out. Nothing else. Renata set copies on the low table beside him. The transfer consent form, the lab release, the thaw authorization, and Walter Heinz's 13-page distilled summary of the handwriting analysis, the one that laid out the Daniel R. Marsh problem in clinical, irrefutable language. Gerald looked at the photographs last, his black Lexus, Space 9, 9:18 a.m. He looked at it for a long time. "I only drove Marcus," he said. The room absorbed it. I don't think he realized, in the moment he said it, what he had just confirmed, that he had known exactly where they were going, that he had been present, that the choice to use the word only, not I, didn't know what Marcus was doing, or I had nothing to do with this, but only, meant he understood there was something larger he was attempting to diminish his part in. Renata did not correct him. She simply reached into the envelope and produced the second set of documents. The family account records. Claire's legal expenses for the fertility procedure had been paid from the Voss family household account, Gerald's account, the one in his name after his wife passed. $4,460, cleared on December 6th, the day after the transfer. There was also the email. Renata placed it last, as if she understood the particular weight of it. It had been sent from Gerald's personal address, the one he used for the hospital boards, the one on his embossed stationery, at 11:52 p.m. on December 1st, the night before Marcus drove to the clinic with a forged consent form in a manila envelope. It said, "Sign the way Claire showed you. Nobody will look that closely." Gerald stared at those 12 words for what felt like a long time. "That was," he started. "We'll need you to come with us for a formal interview," Renata said. "Your attorney is welcome to be present." He was gripping his coat pocket with both hands now. His knuckles had gone the particular color that knuckles go when a person is trying to hold themselves upright through grip alone. "My daughter, Ms. Voss, has been notified separately," Renata said. "Her attorney is already at our offices." I watched him understand what that meant. That Claire had not come with him this morning. That Claire had been located somewhere else, by someone else. At roughly the same hour, Gerald walked into a fertility clinic and decided to spend 45 seconds telling me things designed to hollow me out. There was no satisfaction in it that felt clean. I want to say that plainly, because I think the stories about moments like this tend to describe something triumphant, something where the scales visibly balance and the person who wronged you goes gray with the specific weight of justice. And maybe it looks like that from the outside. From the inside, it was mostly just exhaustion that had been standing up for a long time, finally being allowed to sit down. The clinic director had appeared at the end of the hallway. Her name was Dr. Adaze Brennan, and she had been in regular contact with Diane for 10 months, and she looked at the scene in front of her with the particular expression of someone who had expected this day and was relieved, primarily, that it had finally come. Renata was already opening a second envelope. Gerald looked at me, just for a moment. Not the way he had looked at me when he walked in, the bright, satisfied look of someone delivering a wound, but the way a person looks at someone when they have realized, too late, that they significantly misjudged the room. I didn't look away. Because what Renata had not told him yet, what no one in that room knew except me and Diane, and the 2 junior investigators who had spent 7 weeks going back through 13 years of Claire's financial records, was that the consent form was not the only document we had found with a problem. Claire had, in the course of our marriage, made several financial decisions I had not fully understood at the time. Investments in accounts with both our names moved at particular moments. A life insurance policy adjustment, a beneficiary change on a retirement account that had been made 5 months before she told me she wanted a divorce. Changes that would have required my signature on documents that had, according to the records, my signature on them. Walter Hines had looked at 3 of those signatures as well. His assessment was in the second envelope Renata was opening. The Daniel R. Marsh problem, it turned out, was not new. It was a practice run. I will not give you every detail of what came next, because some of it is still working through the system the way these things do. Slowly, procedurally, in the language of courts and investigators and attorneys who charge by the hour and do not make promises. Diane does not make promises. Renata does not make promises. What they give me instead is the documentation, which I have learned to trust more than promises. Claire was placed under investigation for the embryo theft, which is what Diane called it, always, in every filing, with a precision that I appreciated. The unauthorized use and transfer of a genetic embryo without the consent of its biological contributor. Wisconsin had passed legislation 3 years prior expanding civil and criminal protections around reproductive material, and Diane had been watching those provisions with the patience of someone who knew they would eventually become relevant. They became relevant. The forgery charges were separate and additional. There is a particular category of fraud that involves forging consent documents in a medical context, and the fact that the forged document authorized the use of a person's genetic material without their knowledge placed this in territory that Howard Pierce, Claire's attorney, a man with an excellent reputation who was now visibly sweating through what I imagined was a very expensive shirt in Renata's offices, had not anticipated needing to navigate. The financial fraud investigation added a third layer. What Renata's team found in Claire's records over 7 weeks of examination was a pattern, not an incident. The life insurance adjustment, the beneficiary change on the retirement account, 2 investment transfers from a joint account made in the 2 months before she told me our marriage wasn't working, transfers that required my signature on authorization documents that Walter Hines now had in his possession alongside the consent form. The Daniel R. Marsh problem was not new. The embryo consent form was the 4th time. It was the first time someone at a clinical institution had compared the signature against a file full of previous examples bearing my full legal name. Howard Pierce arrived at Renata's offices that morning, believing he was handling an embryo dispute, a family law matter with some procedural complexity. He left with a list of charges that covered a span of years, and a client who had apparently been signing her husband's name to documents long before she decided to stop being his wife. Gerald was charged as an accessory in the embryo transfer, based primarily on the email and the parking lot footage, and his own words in the waiting room. I only drove Marcus. 12 words he had given freely to a senior investigator who had been looking for his cooperation for months and had not expected to receive it quite so efficiently or quite so publicly, or in a fertility clinic waiting area with a receptionist and 2 other patients as witnesses. His hospital foundation boards asked him to take a temporary leave of absence 2 days after the charges became public record. It was phrased, according to the press release, as a mutual decision. Marcus. I sat with this one the longest. I sat with it in Dr. Bennett Choi's office on a Tuesday in March, in the chair across from the Heron print, and I did not know how to start. Bennett waited. He is good at waiting. I said, I don't know how to be angry at someone I still love. Bennett said, you don't have to choose. Marcus had contacted the DOJ through his own attorney 7 weeks after that morning in the clinic. Marcus. I sat with this one the longest. I sat with it in Dr. Bennett Choi's office on a Tuesday in March, in the chair across from the Heron print, and I did not know how to start. Bennett waited. He is good at waiting. I said, I don't know how to be angry at someone I still love. Bennett said, you don't have to choose. Marcus had contacted the DOJ through his own attorney 7 weeks after that morning in the clinic. He requested a cooperation agreement. Renata called Diane to discuss terms, and Diane called me, and I said what I had spent 3 weeks deciding I would say, which was, let him cooperate and let the legal system decide what that's worth. He gave them everything, every email, every conversation, the exact date Claire had called him, 3 months before she told me our marriage wasn't working, which meant she had started building the replacement before she had finished demolishing what existed, and told him what she wanted to do, the way she had framed it, that I had essentially given up on the fertility process, that the embryos were legally as much hers as mine, that the divorce was going to happen anyway, and this was just a matter of moving forward with what she'd already decided was rightfully hers. papers. She had not mentioned that we had a storage agreement with a mutual consent clause, or she had mentioned it and told him it wouldn't matter. He had believed the version she offered, or he had wanted to, because the version she offered gave him what he wanted too. I do not know how to hold Marcus entirely. Dr. Bennett Choi told me, in that level, unhurried way he has, that I was allowed to hold multiple things at once without resolving them. The love that was real, the betrayal that was also real, the grief, the 13 years, the complicated fact that Marcus's cooperation had strengthened the case significantly, and that part of me, the compliance auditor part, the methodical part that had spent 16 months being more thorough than they believed anyone would bother to be, that part was grateful. While another part of me was not ready to be grateful for anything Marcus had done. I hold those things. I don't always hold them gracefully. What I didn't expect in the aftermath was the particular silence of it. Claire and Marcus's social media went quiet the week the investigation became public record. Gerald's Facebook page, the one with the photographs, the answered prayers, the posts about Caleb that I had read every one of and not commented on, went private, then disappeared. Caleb was 13 months old. He has my genetic material. He also has a mother under criminal investigation, and a father who cooperated with the prosecution of that investigation, and a grandfather who is facing accessory charges for an email he sent at 11:52 p.m. on a December night when he was confident that nobody would look that closely. I think about Caleb. I won't tell you I don't. I have a lawyer and a legal position and a right to various determinations the court will eventually make, and I have Dr. Bennett Choi to help me think through what I want from those determinations, what I am able to want from them, what it means to want something from a situation this complicated. What I know is that I did not come to that fertility clinic that morning to make a scene. I came prepared. I had my Navy legal folder. I had my appointment with Dr. Okonkwo. I had Renata Boyle's number in my phone and Diane's instructions about how to behave if Gerald appeared, and I had understood when I walked through those automatic doors that there was a reasonable probability Gerald might appear, because Renata had known he had a standing Thursday morning appointment at the clinic. Something about Marcus's postpartum support group, where Gerald had apparently started accompanying him. I had not engineered the encounter. I had simply not avoided it, and I had sat very still when Gerald walked in with his charcoal coat and his gold cufflink and his 12 seconds of cruelty, and I had waited, and I had asked one quiet question, and the woman who came through the door behind him had been carrying everything he had convinced himself nobody would ever look for. 7 weeks after that morning, Dr. Okonkwo called to tell me the results of a procedure I had come to the clinic that day to discuss in earnest. I had one remaining viable embryo in cryogenic storage. The others had been the ones used without my consent, the one that became Caleb, and one that had not taken during my previous transfers. The one remaining was the last of what we had built, what I had built, through cycles and retrievals and hope that had cost me more than the bills I can add up in a spreadsheet. It was mine, completely mine now, under a court determination signed by Judge Allaby, whose careful attention to reproductive law had not wavered once through the entire 16-month proceeding. Dr. Okonkwo said, with the precision of someone who chooses her words carefully, "I want you to take whatever time you need." I told her I had been taking time. I told her I thought I was ready to stop. There is a thing that happens after the justice part, and I want to be honest about this because nobody tells you about it. The stories don't go here. They end at the mic drop, or the gray face, or the envelope on the table, and they leave out the part that comes next, which is just your regular life, waiting for you, still requiring your attention. My regular life involves an apartment I like, work I find meaningful, a therapist with a heron print, and a decision I'm in the process of making carefully. It also involves the memory of Gerald Voss's face in a waiting room. Not the triumphant one, not the one he walked in wearing, but the one he had when the second envelope opened, and he understood that the thing he had done with confidence and certainty, and the absolute conviction that nobody would look that closely had been looked at, very closely, for 16 months. He had organized it. The email said so. His own words said so. The parking lot said so. He had organized it, and then he had posted photographs of the result and called it an answered prayer. I think about that sometimes. The certainty required to do something like that. The confidence. The way power can make a person feel invisible to consequence, untouchable, as if the rules that govern everyone else are simply less applicable to someone who sends embossed thank you notes and remembers everyone's name. I think about my own name. Daniel Robert Marsh Voss. All 4 words of it. The ones I had carried through 7 years of someone else's family, and 2 losses, and 16 months of being methodical when I wanted to scream. The forger didn't know my full name. That was the crack in the wall. One procedural detail, sitting there, waiting for someone to look. I looked. If you are still here, I want to tell you one last thing. I have not decided what to do with my remaining embryo. That decision belongs to me and my doctor, and possibly, eventually, someone I have not yet met, or someone I already know in a form that hasn't revealed itself yet. It is mine to make, in the time I choose, without anyone's timeline pressing against it. That is the thing they tried to take from me. Not just the embryo, the timeline, the right to move through grief at a human pace, the right to say I need a little time without that time being used against me. I have it back. That's the part Gerald didn't see when he walked into that waiting room and looked down at me in my chair. He saw a man sitting alone in a fertility clinic a year after his divorce, and he read it as stillness that looked like defeat. He mistook it for something that wasn't moving. Everything was moving. He just wasn't watching closely enough.